Hey guys, tonight we step into the smoky heart of ancient Rome, into a place that never truly sleeps. You probably won't survive this shift, to be honest, because the heat alone feels like standing inside a forge, and the smell of yeast, sweat, and charred crusts would probably knock you flat before sunrise. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it right now for you? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the bakery at midnight. Well, not a bakery like you know. The word is pistrina, and it's half workshop, half inferno. A low, vaulted ceiling presses down, blackened by years of smoke. The air is so thick with flour dust that your breath feels like dough forming in your lungs. Every sound seems muffled, except for the low crackle of the oven, an ancient dome of brick and volcanic stone that glows from within like a second sun. Around you, men in short tunics move in a trance of repetition. Knead, fold, slap, turn, toss, repeat. There's no clock on the wall, no window for dawn to peek through, just firelight and instinct. This, right here, is how Roman time begins, not with a bell tower or sundial, but with bread. The baker beside you, let's call him Gaius, has been at this since yesterday afternoon. His beard is dusted white, his arms thick as rollings. He doesn't measure by hour, he measures by color. The first loaves of the night will feed soldiers marching at dawn, so every second matters. But no one counts seconds here, they count crusts. The oven hisses as he shoves a long wooden peel inside. The heat hits your face like opening an angry god's mouth. A faint smell rises, the sweetness of wheat just beginning to brown. 2 breaths longer, he mutters, eyes narrowing. Not minutes, breaths. He's timed enough batches to know exactly how many his lungs can take before bread turns from gold to ash. A boy nearby stirs the embers with an iron rake, humming some street tune about fortuna and unlucky loaves. The rhythm is steady, hypnotic. You realize he's not just passing time, he's marking it. When the tune ends, it's time to rotate the trays. This is their music of hours, where every verse equals a tiny eternity in bread time. Outside, the city is silent, except for the distant hooves of a night patrol and the soft rush of the Tiber. Inside, the ovens breathe. There's something eerie about it, as if Rome itself exhales through these chimneys, timing the heartbeat of its empire by loaves rising and falling. A mainstream historical fact slips through your mind. By the 1st century CE, Rome had more than 200 pistrinae scattered through its neighborhoods. Some were enormous industrial bakeries, serving entire districts or even the army. Archaeologists at Pompeii found one preserved mid-bake, loaves still in the oven when Vesuvius froze time. The irony? The volcano became the only true clock in a place that never had one. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Roman bakers were technically state contractors. They were legally bound to bake a certain quota of bread for public rations. The annona, failing to do so, or worse, burning the lot, wasn't just bad for business. It could be treated as sabotage. Imagine getting arrested because your sourdough came out too crunchy. You wipe the sweat from your forehead, and it comes away white with flour. The air is alive with motes swirling like golden snowflakes in the firelight. Somewhere in the back, a donkey grinds grain at a rotary mill. Its hooves clop in a rhythm so steady that the workers take it as gospel. When the hooves slow, the dough has risen enough. Gaius glances toward the ceiling. 3rd bell from the watchtower, he murmurs. That means halfway to dawn. But you notice, He doesn't actually wait for the sound, he just knows. The crusts are darkening to that perfect tawny shade that means morning isn't far off. Historians still argue whether Roman bakers truly used bread color as a form of timekeeping, or if it was more poetic than practical. But standing here, you can see how the method makes sense. The temperature of the fire, the texture of the dough, the exact hue of the crust, these all change predictably through the night, like the movement of shadows on a sundial. When you bake every day, time stops being a number and starts being a smell, a glow, a crackle. A joke crosses your mind. In modern kitchens, you'd set a timer. Here, you just hope your nose has tenure. Someone shouts near the oven, "Too soon." A loaf comes out pale and soft, a crime against the morning. Gaius smirks, tears off a chunk, and tosses it to you. "Try it," he says. It's warm, chewy, bland. That's what happens when you fall asleep on duty. The boy at the fire blushes, clearly the guilty one. "The city eats by your mistakes," Gaius adds, "so learn fast." It's strange to think about it, but this whole empire, its soldiers, traders, and senators, will begin their day when these loaves are done. Every neighborhood depends on the quiet rhythm of these hidden bakers. You can almost hear the future rumbling beyond the walls. Carts rolling, vendors shouting, fountains splashing. But for now, time belongs to the ovens. The smell sharpens. It's almost dawn. The loaves are perfect. Crusts golden, dusted with ash that looks like frost. The heat eases just slightly. The air less angry. Gaius finally sits, shoulders sagging, eyes half closed. He doesn't look at a clock. He looks at his bread and nods. That's his sunrise. You take one last breath of the smoky air and realize you've just lived through a Roman hour without ever hearing a tick or a bell. Only the rise and fall of dough, the hiss of fire, and the patience of a man who measures life in crusts. The next batch goes in, and just like that, the crust clock begins to tick again. You can almost feel it. Each loaf, a tiny sun, rising and burning in its own orbit. Gaius doesn't need an hourglass or shadow stick. His timekeeper lives in the oven's mouth. When he slides a tray inside, he's not just baking, he's setting a timer only he can read. You crouch beside the glowing arch and peer into its orange throat. The air shimmers like molten glass. Loaves sit in concentric circles, outer ones pale as sand, inner ones already tanning into bronze. Gaius points with his paddle. "That's the first quarter," he says. "Give it a song and a half." You frown. "A what?" He chuckles. "A song, one of the short ones. About 200 heartbeats." His eyes gleam. That's bread time. This strange rhythm keeps everyone moving. The apprentice at the mill hums a repetitive tune. The fireboy taps the oven rim with an iron rod in sync. It's a language of rhythm, where a lull in the noise means the bake is off-tempo. In a way, the whole bakery is an orchestra, with no conductor except the crusts. Historians still argue whether such timing rituals were formalized or just instinctive. There's evidence from Pompeii and Ostia Antica that bakers used standardized routines, especially for state-supplied bread. But nothing written survives. All that remains are ovens and loaves, frozen mid-bake, silent witnesses to an invisible clock. You lean closer. The loaves at the center begin to crack open with soft sighs. The crusts blister and deepen in color, and suddenly the air smells of nuts and toasted grain. Gaius closes his eyes. "That's the halfway mark," he murmurs. You ask how he knows. He shrugs. You can hear it. The pop tells you. It's oddly comforting, the idea that sound could replace seconds. Every baker here carries time in their senses. Smell for minutes, sight for half hours, touch for temperature. When they press a crust and feel the spring under their fingers, they can tell the exact moment before burn. There's no external reference, no clepsydra dripping water, no official hour, only bread. And yet, it works. Rome runs on this kind of intuition. Out in the streets, people wake when the smell of crusts rolls through the alleys. Bread doesn't just measure time, it announces it. The city's first alarm clock isn't mechanical, it's edible. Here's a solid historical fact to anchor you. Roman bakers often lived attached to their workshops. Excavations at Pompeii show apartments directly above or beside ovens, meaning families literally slept above fire. The first breath of dawn for them wasn't sunlight, it was heat rising through the floorboards and the faint crackle of crust below. And a quirky tidbit. Some Romans believed the first smell of fresh bread each day was good luck. Bonus omen. Housewives would lean from windows to catch it, whispering wishes for fortune or love. You imagine 1,000 people all sniffing the same invisible breeze, their day beginning not by clock tower, but by crust stone. A spark jumps from the fire pit, landing near your sandal. You shuffle back fast. Gaius grins. Careful, the oven's got opinions. You laugh, realizing he's serious. He treats the thing like a temperamental god, one that must be read and appeased. Before every batch, he tosses in a pinch of salt and murmurs a phrase. Not quite a prayer, not quite nonsense. Maybe both. The superstition keeps him calm, like knocking wood before a gamble. He tells you once he worked for a baker who could time a loaf by its scent alone, claimed each stage of baking gave off a distinct aroma, predictable to the minute. You could blindfold him, Gaius says, and he'd pull the bread out, perfect, every time. You picture that. A man nose deep in the heat, sniffing like a sommelier of fire. It's strange, though, watching them move without hurry, even though everything they do is a race against invisible decay. Yeast doesn't wait. Dough doesn't pause. There's no such thing as later. Every delay alters the rhythm. You start to realize why they had to invent their own sense of time. The city's official hours meant nothing when bread could rise too fast or burn too slow depending on the night air. Historians still argue whether Roman hours were ever consistent enough to guide daily labor. They weren't fixed. Daylight was divided into 12 portions from sunrise to sunset, meaning an hour in winter was shorter than one in summer. For bakers, that was useless. The only stable measurement was the oven's behavior. A puff of steam bursts from the dome, and Gaius suddenly straightens. Now, he thrusts the peel in, slides out the first ring of loaves, then the second. The crusts gleam, deep brown with a hint of reddish glow. Perfect. He raps one with his knuckle. The hollow thud makes him smile. Hear that? He says. That's the sound of done. You grab a loaf. It's hot enough to make your palms jump. The bottom is smooth and scorched. The top firm. You break it open, and the inside steams like a small volcano. The scent hits you, a mix of sweetness, smoke, and salt. If you can smell honey, he says, it's too soon. If you smell ash, it's too late. You laugh. So basically, trust your nose and pray? He nods gravely. Exactly. There's something poetic in how he says it. Time here isn't marked by sand or shadow, but by faith in your own senses. It's a living measure, flexible, breathing, personal. The crusts become your clock faces, each one burning its hour into existence. In the corner, a young baker accidentally leaves a tray too close to the fire. The edges blacken almost instantly. He curses under his breath. Gaius glances over, but doesn't shout. Instead, he checks the color, then points to the next tray. Shift the ring one step out, he orders. The fire's angry again. You realize what he means. The oven's temperature tells him more than any dial could. It's alive, unpredictable, timed by instinct. A thought crosses your mind. Maybe that's why no Roman clock truly caught on. Why invent one when every craftsman already carried a private version inside their head? Gaius slides the last loaf out and exhales through his teeth. That's another hour gone, he says, though no one's counted. You glance around. The fire glows lower, the first hint of blue dawn seeping through the high-slit window. The city is beginning to stir. Somewhere outside, a rooster crows. The bakers don't even look up. Their time belongs to the crusts, not the sun. The smell of baked grain clings to your clothes as morning light sneaks in through the soot-smeared slit of a window. It hits the flour haze like a divine highlighter, and suddenly every drifting particle glows like tiny suns in suspension. You're blinking, half-dazed, watching the bakers move in the half-light. Ghosts who've traded dreams for dough. Gaius wipes his forehead and motions for you to follow. He steps toward a long wooden table covered in a thin layer of flour. Now watch closely, he says. When the sun comes through that gap, he points toward a chink in the roof where a ray cuts through the dust. The shadows fall right about here. That means it's the hour to fold again. You tilt your head. He's not joking. The beam of light glances off the table's edge and hits a dark groove etched deep into the wood. An accidental sundial of sorts, carved by years of use, and maybe, just maybe, a bit of superstition. When the flour scatters across it, the bright line of sunlight creates shifting patterns, little ephemeral calendars of the morning bake. And here you thought bakers had no clocks. Turns out they invented their own kind of shadow trick right on the workbench. Every table knows the sun, Gaius says softly. Even if the roof doesn't, he grins. We can tell when it's time for the second batch just by watching where the light lands. Historians still argue whether this sort of practice was deliberate. If Roman bakers genuinely designed work tables to track time by morning rays, or if it was simply habit turned into legend. But several bakeries uncovered in Pompeii had skylights directly above their kneading tables, perfectly positioned for that first stream of dawn light. Coincidence? Maybe, but the odds feel poetic. A funny thought hits you. It's almost as if flour dust was their clock face, and the suns beam their hand. You joke, so the gods invented daylight savings, huh? Gaius chuckles. Aye, except they never tell you when it changes. The city outside is waking up now. The rumble of carts and chatter seeps through the walls, blending with the slap of dough and wood. The air smells of yeast and smoke, but also faintly of fish sauce from the tavern next door. Rome in one sniff. You help spread fresh flour, your hands moving awkwardly beside Gaius's confident motions. He needs rhythmic, almost meditative, counting in murmurs under his breath. You realize he's marking time again, each push a beat in an invisible meter. The dough beneath your fingers feels alive, warm, sticky, stretching, breathing. He explains that the texture tells him how long it's been resting. Too soft? Not enough time. Too resistant? Overdone. It's like reading time in muscle memory. He grins at your clumsy attempts. Don't worry, the dough forgives more than the gods. Here's your historical anchor for this section. Roman bakers didn't rely on written recipes or set timers. Everything was tactile. Archaeological evidence shows measuring tools existed. Small bronze cups, scales, but they were rarely used for baking. Everything was done by feel. The temperature of the water, the weight of the flour in one's palm, elasticity of dough, all served as living instruments of time and proportion. And a delightful little fringe fact, some scholars suggest Roman bakers used their own skin as thermometers. When they said warm as blood, they meant it literally, testing water against the inside of their wrist just as modern bakers do. The body itself was their clock and gauge. As the morning heat intensifies, the sunbeam on the table starts shifting. You notice it crawling across the flour toward another groove. Gaius nods. That's our sign. Oven's ready again. He doesn't even look at the fire, but when you do, you see the glow has deepened from amber to red gold, just as he predicted. Funny thing about time, he muses, scooping up dough. It's slower when you watch it, faster when you bake it. He smirks. That's why we don't count it. We smell it. You can't help but laugh. That explains my failed cookies. The bakers move with renewed energy. They shape dough into neat rounds, mark each with a cross, and slide them toward the oven's mouth. You can hear faint sizzling as moisture meets heat. One apprentice times the turning by watching the light pattern shift another finger's width on the table. It's absurdly beautiful. Sunlight and bread, synchronized like clockwork without a single clock. Somewhere behind you, a pigeon coos from the rafters. The air grows hazy again, the flour rising with each movement. You swear you can almost see the seconds drifting in the light, powdery and weightless. Then you hear it. A faint pop, then another. The crusts are forming, tiny explosions of expansion as steam forces its way out. Gaius listens with closed eyes. That's the first half, he whispers. Perfect pace. You notice his lips counting the pops like a metronome, and you wonder if that's how he knows time, through the music of baking. Historians still argue whether Roman ovens were hot enough for consistent crust browning, or whether bakers learned to adjust by instinct each night. The ruins suggest temperatures could reach 300 degrees Celsius, nearly 600 Fahrenheit, but maintaining that over hours without a thermometer would have been an art in itself. So perhaps, yes, the crusts became the most honest clock they had. You find yourself mesmerized by the transformation. The doughs you just shaped are now swelling, splitting, and hardening, the white turning to amber, then to brown. Each stage a minute, each color shift a note in the day's song. The smell changes too, from raw grain to roasted sweetness, to something deeper and faintly bitter. Gaius grins at your wide-eyed stare. First time seeing time baked? He jokes. You nod, still hypnotized. When the loaves are done, he cracks one open to check. The steam kisses your face, hot and fragrant. The inside glows faintly yellow, the crust hard enough to tap like stone. Good, he mutters. The day's awake now. He lines the loaves on a wooden shelf by the wall, their golden skins catching the sunlight. You realize something quietly profound. The bakery has no clock, but the bread itself tells the hour. The lighter loaves belong to dawn, the darker ones to noon. By looking at a single tray, a baker could tell exactly when it came from the fire. And so you've stumbled upon their secret. The crust was their timepiece, their calendar, their silent ticking device. Each loaf, a snapshot of heat and patience. As you breathe in the scent of the freshly baked round, the last of the morning shadow slides off the table groove. The light moves on, like the hand of a clock, turning to the next moment. Gaius stretches, wipes his palms, and grins. There, sun's done its part. Now it's ours again. You look at the loaves, and you can almost hear them whispering seconds to each other as they cool. You step outside for a moment, blinking into the morning glare, and the world feels startlingly loud compared to the quiet hum of the bakery. Rome's streets are already alive, vendors shouting, carts creaking, beggars calling blessings from under porticos. Somewhere, a temple bell rings lazily, but it doesn't mean what you think it does. In Rome, an hour isn't 60 minutes. It's a suggestion. You look up and realize the sky's still a dull milky blue. By modern standards, it's maybe 6 a.m., but here, the hora prima, The first hour of daylight has just begun. Gaius follows you out, squinting, a loaf in hand. He tears it in half and offers you a piece, steaming and crusted, the flavor sharp with salt. That's the first hour, he says, chewing. Not bad, eh? The Romans divided daytime into 12 hours, but because sunrise and sunset shifted with the seasons, their hours stretched and shrank like elastic dough. In winter, an hour might be only 45 of your minutes. In summer, 75. The night, too, had its watches, 4 divisions, marked not by numbers, but by the guards who patrolled them. So when bakers worked by midnight, it didn't mean 12 on the dot. It meant the stillest, coldest part of the night watch, the moment before the fires roared back to life. Historians still argue whether this fluid system frustrated ordinary Romans, or if they simply lived within it like fish in water. But for bakers, it made things interesting. You couldn't rely on sundials after dark, and you couldn't keep a clepsydra, those dripping water clocks, inside a bakery. The heat dried them up too fast. So how did they do it? They invented their own hybrid, part instinct, part gossip. That's right, gossip was their chronometer. Every so often, a watchman or street cleaner would pass by and call out updates from the city watchtower. Third watch ending, or dawn over the Palatine. Bakers listened from their doors, syncing their rhythm with the voices of sleepless Romans. Imagine setting your timer, not by your phone, but by a stranger shouting from 2 streets away. And it worked. The rhythm of the oven met the rhythm of the guard, and between them, the city breathed in time. A fun little historical tidbit. Ancient Roman clepsydrae, water clocks, weren't standardized either. Each city built its own, often wrong version. Some even had adjustable holes to speed or slow the drip, depending on the season. One philosopher complained that he lost arguments simply because the courtroom's water clock leaked faster than reason. You can imagine bakers laughing at that. What use is a leaky hour when your crust is your true measure? Gaius leans against the wall, crumbs in his beard, eyes half closed. We never needed their hours, he says. The oven tells us what time it is. He gestures toward the round building behind him, smoke rising from its roof vents. You look closely now and see how it dominates the alley. The walls radiate heat even from the outside. This thing, he says, patting the brick, has a better memory than any man. It remembers yesterday's fire. That's how we start the day. He explains that the ovens are never allowed to go completely cold. At night, they smother the flames with ash so the embers survive till dawn. The residual warmth helps them guess the night's passage. If the oven's gone cold, Gaius says, then you've overslept. If it's still biting hot, you're early. The oven, in short, is their hourglass. Its heat trickling away through the night, marking time by degrees instead of sand. You try placing your palm against the brick. It's almost too hot to touch. So what time is it now, you ask? Gaius grins. Warm enough to wake the city. 4th part of the day. He doesn't even glance at the sky. Historians still debate whether Roman workers carried personal sundials or relied solely on public ones. A few portable examples exist. Tiny bronze dials, small enough to fit in your palm, but they were toys for the wealthy. Bakers like Gaius didn't need them. Their clocks were heat, smell, and rumor. A gust of wind swirls flour dust around your ankles. The street smells of life, baked bread, manure, olive oil, and ambition. Rome pulses like a giant organism, and you sense how essential timing is to its metabolism. The bakeries feed the people feed the markets feed the empire. If the baker's rhythm falters, the city's stomach growls, and believe me, no emperor wants to hear that. A joke slips into your mind. So basically, if you burned breakfast, you could start a riot. Gaius raises an eyebrow. Not just a riot, maybe a revolution. He's not exaggerating. There were recorded bread riots in Rome whenever supply faltered. Imagine being the guy who mistimed a batch and accidentally invented political chaos. He pulls a handful of coarse salt from a pouch and tosses it into the street. For Fortuna, he says, may the next batch rise before she changes her mind. You chuckle, thinking of all the small rituals that help humans wrestle time into shape. The sunlight climbs higher, casting sharper shadows on the cobblestones. The day feels more precise now, though you know it isn't. Gaius tilts his head toward the noise of the forum. Listen, hear that? The hum of traders, the bray of mules, the clang of metal shutters. That's how we tell the 6th hour's near. The city gets louder, the shadows get shorter, the crusts brown faster. The connection hits you all at once. For Romans, time isn't just measured, it's felt. It's the change in noise, in temperature, in smell. It's life cooking, a mainstream historical fact to anchor you again. Romans didn't develop the 12-hour mechanical day until much later. For most of their history, time was relational: morning, midday, afternoon, dusk. Even legal contracts referred to vague phrases like after the 3rd hour or before sunset. In a sense, every job invented its own private clock. For soldiers, it was the trumpet. For bakers, it was crust. For you, right now, it's the sound of your stomach growling. You and Gaius head back inside. The light dims again, replaced by the furnace glow. The air thickens with humidity and the tang of yeast. He checks the embers with a poker and nods approvingly. Still hot enough to fool the sun, he says. Good. Let's start the second round. You realize as he moves that this entire routine, mixing, waiting, watching, baking, is a conversation with the invisible. He's not timing anything in numbers. He's reading the story of heat itself. You wonder, briefly, what would happen if he stopped? Would the city notice? Probably by lunchtime. The air inside the bakery thickens again as you step through the doorway, back into the red half-dark where the fire rules. The sound of the city fades to a low hum, swallowed by the oven's breathing. It's mid-morning now, though no one here says so. In this place, time isn't divided into hours. It's measured in batches. Each loaf, a silent witness to a moment that will never repeat. The heat hits you like a wall. You wipe your brow and realize it's not even sweat anymore. It's steam from your own skin. The fire has no off switch. Its roar blends with the rhythmic scrape of paddles and the thump of dough against wood. You notice something unsettling. The bakers move with mechanical precision, but no one speaks. They don't need to. The oven gives the orders. Welcome, Gaius mutters, to the beast that never sleeps. He pats the curved stone arch affectionately, then winces. Too hot to touch. You look closer and see that the oven's mouth glows faintly even when no flames are visible. It's alive, in a way. This is where time gets recycled. Night's dying embers feeding morning's first batch. You can almost imagine the oven as an immortal creature, swallowing wood and exhaling hours. And indeed, some Roman ovens were older than the men who used them. Archaeologists have found bakeries whose furnaces show layers of ash, centuries thick, built and rebuilt without ever cooling completely. The fire passed from generation to generation like a family heirloom. Imagine being born to a flame that's already been burning for 50 years. The night shift guards it like a sacred relic. Their duty is simple but absolute. Never let it die. One embersman, often the youngest apprentice, stays awake all night, feeding the oven just enough wood to keep it breathing but not enough to burn the next day's bread too soon. They call him Custos Ignis, the keeper of fire. Gaius points toward a boy curled beside the wall, fast asleep now that dawn's heat has taken over. That one, he says softly, saved us last winter. Wind got in through the chimney, nearly killed the flame. He slept with his face in the ash pile to keep it alive. He chuckles grimly, woke up looking like Vulcan's chimney sweep. You can't tell if he's joking, but the boy's blackened cheeks suggest it's at least half true. The oven hums. Gaius kneels to rake the coals, the motion fluid and practiced. A sleeping oven is a dead city, he says. We keep Rome's stomach warm. It hits you then. This thing isn't just a furnace, it's a pulse. Each bakery is one heartbeat in a vast organism, and together they keep the empire alive. No wonder some historians call the Roman baking network the world's first invisible clock. The fires never synchronized formally, but their rhythm aligned through demand. When one bakery's loaves began to cool, another's were just rising. A chain of warmth passing from neighborhood to neighborhood, keeping the people fed and the hours flowing. Still, historians argue about whether these ovens truly burned without pause, or if that's a romantic myth. Excavations show layered soot suggesting continuity, but also maintenance breaks. Perhaps the truth, as usual, is somewhere in the middle. The illusion of perpetual motion created by overlapping shifts of bakers who refuse to let silence settle. Gaius hands you the peel and gestures to the glowing interior. Feed it, he says. Quick. You fumble, toss in a small bundle of olive branches, and the flames leap up instantly, licking the dome's black ceiling. The oven roars awake, its belly trembling. The noise is almost alive. See, Gaius says, you've just given it a breath. Now it'll talk to you. Sure enough, the crackle changes. It's subtle, less a sound than a conversation of pops and sighs. You realize each tone signals something. A sharp hiss means moisture. A deep thump means the floor's too hot. A faint whisper means the coals are settling. The bakers hear it all and adjust instinctively. Their ears are their clocks. Most people fear the fire, Gaius says, eyes glinting. We read it. A quirky tidbit drifts through your memory. Roman ovens, or fornaces, were so durable that some were repurposed as shrines when the bakeries closed. People would toss coins or bread crusts into the ashes for luck, believing the oven spirits could bless or curse a household's fortune. Even centuries later, in medieval Italy, the superstition persisted. Don't offend the bakery god, or tomorrow's bread will fall flat. You glance again at the furnace, half expecting it to blink. A joke slips from your lips before you can stop it. So basically, you're priests of a gluten volcano. Gaius smirks. Aye, and you've just made your first offering. He isn't entirely wrong. The baker's world blurs the line between craft and worship. Their tools are relics. Wooden peels worn smooth as ivory, ash rakes blackened beyond recognition. Every gesture carries centuries of repetition. They may not own clocks, what they own eternity through habit. You think about the night shifts, the ones who never see sunlight, who live by ember glow alone. For them, time must feel circular, each batch folding into the next. Sleep becomes myth, daylight, rumor. Their lives revolve entirely around maintaining the illusion of perpetual fire. You realize with a strange chill that they've created their own sun under stone, one that never rises, never sets, but always burns. Historians still debate whether these round-the-clock ovens contributed to Rome's ability to feed over 1 million citizens. Some argue that this constant heat production, shared among guild bakeries, was the unseen backbone of the Annona grain dole system. Without it, The empire's promise of daily bread might have collapsed under its own logistics. The heat becomes too much. Sweat runs down your temples, and the air feels molten. Gaius laughs at your discomfort. You get used to it, he says, or you die trying. He points at the wall, where layers of soot tell their own story. Thick black near the floor, fading to gray higher up. That's our calendar, he says. Each ring, a year of baking. You stare closer. Indeed, the wall looks like the inside of a tree trunk, the strata of time recorded in smoke. There's something haunting about it. A wall that remembers every loaf ever baked, every hour ever passed in flame. The boy wakes up, yawning, face streaked with ash. He stretches, checks the coals, and nods. Still breathing, he says simply. Gaius tosses him a scrap of bread as reward, and so the day continues. The beast never sleeps. The crusts keep darkening, and the bakers, guardians of warmth, priests of the invisible, march through time without clocks, guided only by the living pulse of their fire. You step back, your vision blurring from the heat, and it feels like the world itself is baking around you. Maybe that's what Rome really was, a city that turned hunger into rhythm, and rhythm into empire. By the time the oven quiets to a low, satisfied murmur, you've lost track of where morning ended and afternoon began. The bakers don't notice. They never do. They live inside a loop where each batch of bread replaces the hours they've burned away. You think about asking someone what time it is, then realize the question would sound ridiculous here. Instead, Gaius slaps your shoulder and gestures toward the trays cooling near the window. Golden loaves, split like smiling faces, breathe steam into the air. The scent is heavenly, rich, tangy, alive. Come, he says. This is where you learn how crust tells the clock. You blink. The what tells the what now? He grins. The crust. It's how we know when to stop. He picks up a round loaf, knocks it gently with his knuckle, and the sound is crisp, like tapping a ceramic bowl. That, he says, is noon. You think he's joking, but he isn't. The Romans had ways of measuring time by light and shadow. Yes, but in the deep quarters of the city, where walls rose too high and smoke dimmed the sun, bakers used other cues. When to feed the fire, when to rest the dough, when to swap shifts. All of it written in the bread's changing skin. You peer closer. Each loaf bears a faint gradient, darker at the edge, lighter at the top. That's because of the dome, Gaius explains. When the flame hits from the right, we know morning's turning. The heat changes angle before the light outside does. We see it here first. It dawns on you. The oven is a kind of sundial, but instead of casting shadows, it paints them in flour and crust. He tosses another loaf toward you. This one's from yesterday. Look at the bottom. You flip it over and see a pattern of darker spots near the center, like freckles. That's what we call oculus solis. The sun's eye means the heat dipped before dawn. The fire was hungry too early. He laughs softly. We all get hungry before breakfast. You can't help smiling. It's absurdly poetic. A bakery that reads time in color gradients and crackling sounds. Yet it makes perfect sense. When you spend your life surrounded by fire, your sense of time naturally bakes into what you touch. A mainstream historical fact drifts to mind. The Romans did have mechanical water clocks, clepsydrae, but those were expensive, delicate, and prone to freezing or clogging with dust. In a bakery, you couldn't afford such fuss. The fornax was clock and calendar combined, dependable so long as the fire never faltered. Some historians even speculate that professional bakers, the pastores, had their own unspoken time codes, burn patterns, crust shades, even smells that translated to shifts. One scholar described it as olfactory chronometry, the science of smelling time. You imagine Gaius nodding approvingly at that phrase, though he'd probably just call it common sense. He reaches for a cooling rack and points to a tray of smaller buns, their tops glistening like amber. That's mid-afternoon, he says. You can tell by the sheen. The air's thicker by then, more humidity. The glaze sweats faster. Wait, you say, you're telling me you can tell the hour by sweating bread? By the way it stops sweating, he corrects, dead serious. Once it cools too fast, we know the day's turning. Shadows start to climb the alley. Time to close the outer hatch. And just like that, the bakery begins to change rhythm. Doors creak. The outer shutters narrow the light. Somewhere outside, carts begin to roll again, and voices rise. A late morning rush, maybe, though no one names it as such. To them, it's the time between the second crust crack and the last batch's sigh. You try to imagine explaining this system to a modern clockmaker. You'd probably get laughed out of the workshop. But here, it's elegant. The loaf doesn't lie. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Ancient Romans sometimes marked their bread with stamped seals, not for branding, but for tracking time and ownership. If a loaf overbaked, the seal revealed which baker was responsible. Archaeologists have found carbonized loaves in Pompeii, still bearing those marks, perfectly readable, even after nearly 2,000 years. Imagine that, a burned bread timestamp that outlasted empires. You mention this to Gaius. He nods, a bit wistful. Yes, Pompeii's ghosts still tell time, he says. Even their crusts remember the hour they died. That's darker than you expected, but strangely fitting. Then he does something unexpected. He breaks one of the loaves in half and hands you the softer core. Taste it, he says. That's how you really know the hour. You bite in, and he's right. The flavor shifts with heat, with time itself. The morning batch tastes smokier, denser. This one is airy, full of warmth still trapped from a slightly higher flame. That, he explains, is the difference between early and late fire. You can taste where the sun would be. You nearly choke laughing. So bread's basically edible daylight. Exactly, he says, with a smirk. A loaf is sunlight's diary. He isn't exaggerating. The Romans were deeply sensitive to these minute shifts in baking. Some recipes even instructed bakers to adjust kneading time based on the color of crusts from the previous batch. The idea was that the bread could tell you about yesterday's humidity, yesterday's heat, data stored in its very surface. Historians still argue whether this was science or superstition. Some say Roman bakers genuinely understood thermal dynamics better than most craftsmen of their age. Others claim they relied entirely on ritual and intuition. You can see both sides. To you, watching Gaius and his team work, it's a kind of alchemy disguised as routine. The afternoon stretches lazily now, the light soft and amber. You find yourself mesmerized by the rhythm, the bakers swapping trays, brushing flour off boards, gauging crusts with the faintest touch. Each sound blends into a low percussion of time passing. You could almost fall asleep standing here, if not for the heat. One of the younger men jokes that the new apprentice once tried to time a nap by setting a loaf beside his bed. He woke up to smoke and no eyebrows. Everyone laughs. You realize humor here revolves entirely around fire and sleep deprivation. In this world, the two are natural enemies. You glance again at the wall calendar of soot, at the loaves lined like suns across the cooling racks, and it hits you how much time itself depends on something as fragile as crust. 1 second too long, and the measure burns. 1 moment too soon, and the measure collapses. The Romans turned impermanence into precision, reading eternity in a single crackled surface. You don't need a sundial anymore. You have the bread. You're leaning against the flour-dusted counter now, half dazed from heat and half hypnotized by the quiet rhythm of crusts cooling. When Gaius calls you over again, his grin has that mischievous tilt you've learned means trouble, or at least a new kind of exhaustion. "Come on," he says. "Time to meet the water." You blink, confused. "The what now?" "The other half of our clock," he replies, hefting a clay jar that sloshes like a restless sea. "We've talked about the fire side of time. Now, let's see how the dough remembers it." He drags the jar onto a wooden table, where a dented bronze bowl waits. The surface of the table ripples with faint impressions, handprints, knife nicks, dried flour veins. It's more relic than furniture. The whole bakery, you realize, is a time machine built out of memory and heat. Gaius tips the jar. Cool water spills in, catching light from the fire like liquid gold. "This," he says softly, "is dawn in a bowl." It's easy to scoff at first, but there's something sacred in the way he handles it. You notice how he doesn't measure by cup or scale. He watches the ripples, the way the water trembles before settling. "See that?" he says. "When it moves slow, it means the air's heavy, humid. The dough will rise faster, so we shorten the knead." You raise an eyebrow. "So you're forecasting time by watching water?" "Exactly," he says, as if it's the most normal thing in the world. A mainstream historical fact surfaces in your mind. Roman bakers were, in a sense, amateur meteorologists. Since yeast and fermentation depended on temperature and humidity, they learned to predict weather changes through the behavior of dough and water. Some historians even argue these bakers developed proto-scientific observation long before formal meteorology existed. But as Gaius mixes, you sense there's more poetry than science in his gestures. His hands move with slow confidence, folding water into flour, like he's taming a living thing. "We call this horum tangere," he murmurs, touching the hour. You stare. "You mean you can tell the hour just by touching dough?" He nods. "Feel it. Go on." You press your fingers into the cool, pliant mass. It pushes back. Not quite elastic, not quite yielding. "That's early," he says. "See how it fights you? Too tight. The yeast hasn't woken fully yet. Give it time." You pull your hand away, sticky with flour. "Feels like an under-caffeinated cat." He laughs. A fair comparison. As the mixing continues, you notice how every stage has its own tempo. The early folds sound different from the later ones. The slap of dough against wood turns from dull thud to elastic clap, like a heartbeat picking up speed. "The sound tells us more than the sight," Gaius says. "The dough's voice changes through the day. By the time it whispers, the sun's halfway across the sky." A younger apprentice pipes up from the corner. "Sometimes the dough sings too." Everyone chuckles. "Sings, you ask?" The boy grins. "When it ferments right, you can hear bubbles popping like tiny sighs. My master says that's the dough dreaming about the next loaf." That earns another laugh from Gaius. "Dreaming dough, eh? Careful. Next you'll start naming them." You're starting to understand that humor here is half ritual, half survival mechanism. If you don't laugh, you'd probably start hearing the walls whisper back. The dough grows smoother, shinier, more alive under Gaius's hands. He cuts a small piece and presses it flat, then holds it up toward the oven's glow. "See the bubbles?" he says. "That's our timer. The bigger they are, the closer we are to mid-morning." The yeast grows faster as the air warms. You frown. "So you literally read the time in dough bubbles?" "Yes," he replies simply. "The crust marks the past. The dough predicts the future. Between them, we live in the present." That line sits heavy in your mind. The bread is a bridge. Yesterday's fire, tomorrow's rise. you can't help but feel that this bakery has reinvented time, not as something mechanical, but something edible. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Roman bakers, particularly those supplying the military, were ordered to maintain synchronization with the camp cooks. Since sundials weren't practical in marching camps, they used dough as a timing tool. The texture determined when the soldiers' meals would be ready. In a sense, the Roman legions marched by bread clock as much as by drum. Historians still argue, you mention aloud, whether that system was standardized or just local custom. Gaius shrugs. Historians argue about everything. But I know this, if your dough overproofs, you'll miss your lunch, and the legion doesn't forgive that. He folds another turn into the mass. The dough sighs, stretching like muscle under gentle pressure. You start to feel a strange kinship with it. This breathing, growing thing that mirrors your own exhaustion. The air thickens with yeast and smoke. Someone opens a side hatch, letting a cool draft roll in, and suddenly the dough trembles like it's shivering. Ah, Gaia says, the sun's behind a cloud. You blink. You can tell that without looking outside? Of course, he says, almost offended. The dough just told us. There's a pause while the apprentices gather around, their hands resting lightly on the surface. For a moment, no one speaks. You can feel the faint warmth under your palms, the heartbeat of fermentation. It's oddly intimate, like eavesdropping on time itself. Now, Gaia says, we wait. Waiting here isn't idle. It's an art. The bakers clean tools, sweep flour, hum tunes to mark the slow rise. You catch a snatch of song, a rhythmic chant about the 12 bubbles of fortune, some ancient mnemonic for fermentation stages. Apparently, if the dough forms 12 perfect air pockets before collapsing, it's said to be blessed by Fortuna. You smile. So you're fortune tellers too. Gaius winks. Only on slow days. You glance at the lump of dough, swelling like a lazy creature under the cloth. The air feels thicker now. The soundscape different. Less fire, more breath. The bakery's tempo has changed again, and you realize you're learning to hear it. A quiet, invisible rhythm guiding everything. By the time the cloth is lifted, the dough has doubled, smooth as polished marble. Gaius nods approvingly. There, that's the second hour of work. You can see it, feel it, smell it. Time leaves fingerprints on everything. You inhale. It's true. The scent has deepened, richer, with faint sweetness. Even your body knows it's a new hour, though no one said it aloud. Gaius slices a cross into the top and chuckles. Now we bake the future. You can't tell if that's a metaphor or just Tuesday in Rome. Either way, the water's hour has ended. The fires will soon begin again. The fire regains its appetite as the dough goes in. The oven's mouth yawns wide, and Gaius slides the first batch in with the solemnity of a man performing a burial and a birth at once. The loaves disappear into orange light, swallowed by that ancient belly of flame. You can almost hear the soft hiss of moisture turning to steam, the dough's final exhale before transformation. You stand beside him, half dazed, watching the flicker ripple across his face. The bakery feels suspended outside time now, its only heartbeat the sound of fire breathing in cycles. This is where most people get it wrong, Gaius murmurs, still staring into the glow. They think baking is about heat. It's about timing heat. He gestures for you to kneel closer. Look. Inside the oven, the loaves are arranged like a constellation, 12 in a circle, 1 in the center. He points to the middle one. That's the judge. It tells us everything. We call it the testa temporis, the head of time. You squint. Because it's in the middle? Because it burns first, he says, grinning. It tells us when the rest will follow. He holds out a small shard of bronze shaped like a spoon's handle. Old trick, he says. Listen. He slides the metal into the oven just above the loaf's crust and waits. A few seconds later, a faint ping rings out, a sharp metallic note echoing like a drop of water in a cavern. That sound means the dome's at perfect temperature, Gaius explains. Too low, it hums dull. Too high, it shrieks. You shake your head in disbelief. You're literally playing music with fire. He smirks. We all play something. I just prefer percussion. A mainstream historical fact bubbles up from memory. Roman bakers used proofing sounds and acoustic cues to gauge temperature before thermometers existed. In some archaeological finds, fragments of bronze listening spoons have been unearthed in bakery ruins, likely used for exactly what Gaius is demonstrating. He pulls the spoon back, satisfied. Perfect noon, he says simply. The phrase sounds so casual, yet here it replaces the ticking of a clock. Noon isn't when the sun stands highest. It's when the oven sings the right note. You can't help but grin. So, when people ask what time it is, you answer with a song? Better than staring at shadows, he replies. Fire never lies. Around you, the other bakers move in rhythm. One shovels coals deeper, another dusts fresh flour on the stone floor to prevent scorching. The choreography is wordless, each motion practiced into invisibility. It's strangely beautiful, like watching an orchestra that's been playing the same piece for centuries. Gaius nudges you gently. You'll want to step back now. Why? Because in about 10 breaths, the first crusts will crack. You retreat. And sure enough, a faint chorus of pops and sighs fills the air. The sound is almost delicate, like rain on parchment. Gaius closes his eyes, listening. There, he says softly, the bread speaks. That's the hora crustae, the hour of cracking. He grins. Congratulations, you've just heard time break. You can't help but laugh at the poetic absurdity. You people really are philosophers with aprons. Philosophers? He scoffs playfully. No, we're janitors of heat. But as he speaks, there's pride in his tone. This isn't just baking. It's translation work between the invisible and the tangible. Fire burns, dough rises, and somewhere in between, time gets baked into something you can eat. He pulls the first loaf out with a long-handled peel. The crust glows amber, fissured like ancient pottery. The scent alone is dizzying. Smoke, honey, sun-warmed grain. Perfect 5th hour, Gaius says. You blink. You mean afternoon? He shakes his head. No, 5th. We don't measure by sun or by water. We measure by layers. Each crust tells how many turns of the fire it's seen. This one has 5. Feel. He presses your fingers against the surface. You can feel faint ridges, rings of crispness, almost invisible but distinct under touch. Each ring, he explains, marks a moment when the flame flared. That's how we know how long it's been inside. You whistle softly. So, bread has tree rings? Exactly, he says, delighted. You see it now. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind. Archaeologists once found carbonized loaves in Herculaneum with visible ridges believed to indicate pauses during baking, perhaps from a baker pulling them briefly out to rotate. Incredibly, those rings survived centuries of ash, still whispering their story. You mention that, and Gaius nods. Even in death, they kept time. That's what a good loaf does. It remembers. He sets the bread aside to cool. The sound of its crust tightening is almost musical, tiny creaks marking each second. You find yourself unconsciously counting them, as if you could map the day by sound alone. Gaius watches you, amused. Careful, he warns. Once you start hearing time like that, you'll never stop. You'll hear it in walls, in wind, even in silence. You glance toward the window. Outside, faint sunlight filters through narrow alleys, and you realize the city itself might be ticking. Each hearth, each forge, each oven contributing to a massive, unseen symphony of heat and rhythm. Historians still argue whether ancient Rome truly beat in sync like that, whether the city's work hours were so naturally harmonized by fire and trade that it functioned like a living clock. Some scholars dismiss the idea as romantic nonsense. Others say it explains how an empire without watches could move millions in coordinated motion. You decide to believe the romantic version. After all, you've just heard bread sing. Gaius slices open the first loaf. Steam escapes in a long sigh, like the exhale of something ancient. The crumb is perfect, honeycombed, golden, alive. He offers you a piece, and you burn your fingertips but eat it anyway. It tastes like morning turned solid. He laughs at your expression. Good, eh? That's what the right hour tastes like. You nod, speechless. Maybe this is what the Romans meant by mastering time, not owning it, but tasting it. As the next batch goes in, the cycle resets. Heat, sound, scent, crackle. The bakery thrums with invisible arithmetic. Each motion, an equation solved in flour and flame. You realize that if you closed your eyes, you could almost tell the minute just by smell. The sour bloom of yeast giving way to the sweetness of crust, then the smoky tang of finished loaves. It's hypnotic. And as the last loaf is pulled out, Gaius wipes his brow and says quietly, "That's it, the day's third cycle complete. Now we rest before the dusk fire." You look at the bread cooling in rows, still whispering faintly as they settle. The sound is almost like ticking. You smile. "I think your clock is still running." He grins back. "It always does." The air cools a little as the afternoon wanes, though afternoon feels like the wrong word now. The bakery doesn't care about human hours. You've slipped into its rhythm, where time moves in pulses of flame and sighs of bread. Outside, you can hear the faint hum of carts and distant chatter. Inside, everything slows, just enough for the next ritual to begin. Gaius signals toward the door. "Come on," he says. "You've seen how we bake time. Now you'll see how we sell it." He pushes open the heavy wooden hatch that leads to the front stall, and suddenly you're hit with light, noise, and the sweet chaos of Roman street life. The market smells like smoke, olives, sweat, and hope. You step into a narrow lane filled with vendors shouting prices in a dozen accents. A man selling figs argues with a woman about weights. A troop of children chases a dog through puddles. Someone nearby drops a clay pot, and it shatters with theatrical drama. Yet amid it all, the bakery's stall commands a strange kind of calm. The loaves, arranged in neat pyramids, glow softly in the afternoon sun. They look almost alive, each one stamped with a mark, a small circular emblem pressed into the crust before baking. You pick one up. The mark shows 3 dots and a faint swirl. That, Gaius explains, is our time mark. Tells you when it was baked. You turn it over, fascinated. "Like a best before date?" "Exactly," he says, laughing. "Except ours is written in dough, not ink." A mainstream historical fact clicks in your mind. Roman bakers often used bread stamps, pistore signa, not only for ownership, but to indicate the time of baking and quality of grain. It helped officials in the annona, the state grain supply, track freshness and fairness in distribution. Some even functioned like ancient QR codes, carrying complex meaning in a single pattern. You watch as customers line up, mostly workers, a few slaves carrying baskets for their households, and one elegant matron who insists on inspecting each loaf as if she's evaluating jewelry. Gaius greets her warmly, but with obvious patience. "Ah, Lady Calvia," he says, "still timing your lunches to the second, I see." She narrows her eyes. Your morning batch yesterday was too pale. My husband thought it was from the third hour, not the fourth. Gaius bows dramatically. Then I owe your husband a loaf of apology. The matron smirks, satisfied, and selects two darker loaves. These will do. I can tell by the crust they've seen enough sun. You whisper, she really can tell the time by bread? He grins. Oh, she can tell the wrong time very well. The crowd laughs soft, but he's not mocking her. There's affection behind the banter. You sense that in this city, bread isn't just food. It's status, conversation, even theater. A boy runs up with coins clutched in his fist. 2 of the 7th, please, he says. Gaius immediately picks 2 small loaves with dark, firm crusts and hands them over. You can't resist asking, 7th what? 7th hour batch, the boy replies proudly. My father says they keep longer. You realize the bakery has created its own time language, an edible calendar. Loaves of the 1st hour are soft and white, eaten quickly. The 5th are golden and balanced. The 7th are dark and hearty, meant for workers heading into the night. The bread isn't just a product, it's a schedule. The city's hunger flows by crust tone. A quirky tidbit slips into your mind. In ancient Rome, bread stalls often acted as informal timeposts. Instead of asking, "What time is it?" people would ask, "Which loaves are left?" The answer gave both the hour and the mood of the day. Still some 5ths meant early afternoon. Only the 7th remain meant sunset was close. Historians still argue, you murmur aloud, whether that was an organized system or just coincidence. Gaius shrugs. Does it matter? If the bread told them the hour, it worked. He gestures toward the growing line. Every crust carries a memory. Every bite, a little piece of today. You help wrap loaves in linen squares. The heat from them radiates into your palms, faint but steady, like holding the last echo of a drumbeat. People thank Gaius with smiles, some with jokes, others with silent nods. You realize the bakery is more than a shop. It's a heartbeat of routine in a city addicted to chaos. Suddenly, a group of soldiers enters, armor clinking like angry bells. The crowd parts instinctively. The leader, a centurion with a scarred chin, drops a token on the counter. For the barracks, 12 loaves, 8th hour burn. Gaius nods respectfully. You'll get 11. The 12th will still be singing. The soldier grins. Then we'll wait. Rome runs on bread and blood. Might as well make it fresh. They lean on their spears, waiting patiently. You're impressed. Soldiers waiting for bread. An image both absurd and strangely human. Gaius whispers to you, that's why we never close early. If the legion's bread is late, everything's late. It's a simple line, but it explains half the empire. Bread is time. Time is order. Order is Rome. As you wrap the final loaves, you notice how each batch has a distinct scent. Early loaves smell like dawn, mild, yeasty, new. Later ones are smoky, almost caramelized, with a bite that speaks of flame and fatigue. You find yourself thinking, maybe this is how ancient Romans felt the passage of day, not by watching shadows, but by breathing flavor. Gaius leans against the stall and wipes his hands. See, the city tells its time through hunger. Morning mouths want softness. Night mouths want crunch. You laugh. So appetite's your calendar. Always has been, he says. The stomach doesn't lie. The last customers fade into the street. The soldiers take their batch with a gruff nod. Silence settles over the stall, broken only by a pigeon landing on the counter to peck at a crumb. Gaius tosses it a whole chunk. There you go, he says softly. 1 for the 9th hour. The bird coos in gratitude, then flies off toward the glowing rooftops. You watch it disappear and think, somewhere else, another baker is lighting another oven, marking another moment. The sun is dropping now, turning the city bronze. You feel a strange calm, even though no one here ever said the words. You know it's almost evening. The air tells you, the crusts tell you. The bakery closes its shutters, but the oven behind you still hums. The day's last warmth drifts into the street, mixing with the scent of olives and smoke. Tomorrow, Gaius says quietly, we start again at the first crack of dough. You smile. And how will you know when that is? He grins. When the bread dreams again. The sun dips lower, spilling gold across the alley. But inside the bakery, the oven is still breathing. Its heat no longer bites, yet it radiates enough to remind you that time here doesn't stop when people leave. You stand by the counter, feeling the lingering warmth from crusted loaves, imagining the day you've just followed, now compressed into your senses. Sight, smell, touch, even sound. Gaius drags over a stool, wiping his hands on a flour-dusted cloth. Sit, he says. Even bakers have a twilight routine. You perch cautiously. Twilight routine? He grins. Yes, every day after the last batch, we do a round of tasting, adjusting, and recording what the oven tells us. Think of it as journaling in flavor. You watch as he slices into a cooling loaf. Steam curls upward in slow spirals, carrying the scent of golden grain. He pinches a piece between thumb and forefinger and examines it like a jeweler inspecting a diamond. He murmurs, sniffing it. Crisp enough, not dry. A slight caramel hue. 5th hour batch. Successful. You lean closer. How can you tell so precisely? Experience, he says simply, and the dough speaks. You just have to learn its language. The same loaf will taste different at dawn than at dusk, because the air changes, the oven shifts, the yeast remembers. Every bite is a timestamp. A mainstream historical fact threads into your thoughts. Roman bakers often kept detailed notebooks, recording recipes, techniques, and even environmental conditions. Some of these documents, preserved on wax tablets, hint at their sophisticated methods of timing and predicting bread outcomes, proof that they treated baking as both craft and science. But Gaius isn't recording anything now on wax. His notebook is his palette. Each loaf encodes hours of observation, memory, and instinct. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness. Certain Roman bakers believed that the hum of a cooling loaf could predict weather changes. They'd place a loaf near an open window, and if it hummed sharply, it meant rain was coming. You can't decide whether this is superstition or early science. Gaius smiles knowingly when you ask. A little of both, my friend. Dough doesn't lie. People do. You chuckle, but it's half pondering, half fatigue. By now, the bakery has grown quiet. The soft murmur of fire and occasional pop of cooling crust, the only sounds. You notice shadows stretching across the walls, distorted shapes that seem to bend in response to heat. For a moment, you feel as though the bakery itself is alive, breathing in rhythm with the city beyond. Gaius slices another loaf, a dense, dark one from the final batch of the day. He taps the crust. That's the evening loaf. Dense, keeps long. Soldiers like this. Market folk like the 5th hour batch is better, softer, easier to tear. You try one of the softer slices. It's warm but settled. The crumbs slightly springy. The flavor is nuanced. Hints of smoke, honey, and salt. For a split second, you're transported. The streets, the shouts, the hum of carts, the chatter of children. It all compresses into a single sensory snapshot, marked by a bite of bread. Historians still argue, you say aloud, whether Roman bread was more about flavor or just survival nutrition. Gaius raises an eyebrow. Both. But flavor tells time better than hunger. You nod, letting the statement sink in. It makes sense in a world where crust measures hours and dough whispers secrets. Every chew, every crack of the oven is a form of counting. Time doesn't exist as numbers. It exists as sensation. He gestures toward the corner where a small heap of flour remains. We clean after tasting. Flour holds memory too. Look at these streaks, the way it clumps, the pattern it leaves. Tells me about humidity, yesterday's batches, even which apprentice tried to sneak dough while I wasn't looking. You kneel to examine it. True enough, the flour has subtle ridges and hollows, faint marks like fingerprints. It's almost like reading tea leaves, or maybe a map of the day's rhythm. A joke escapes you before you can stop it. So the flour is your detective now? Gaius chuckles. Always, and it never lies. Unlike me, you notice a small pile of leftover scraps from earlier. Tiny pieces of crust, uneven or burned slightly. He picks one up and rolls it between his fingers. Even these, he says softly, tell time. Overbaked means the fire flared too long. Pale, fire died early. Everything leaves a mark. You're starting to see it now. Time isn't imposed here, it's revealed. Each loaf, each crackle, each imperfection is an hour, a minute, a second made tangible. The sky outside deepens to a soft orange. Light fades, yet the warmth from the oven radiates steadily, a reminder that the city's heartbeat continues, even as streets empty. You glance around at Gaius and the apprentices, and suddenly the whole operation feels like a quiet ritual. Tomorrow, Gaius says, eyes fixed on a cooling loaf, we start with the first batch again. The same fire, the same dough, but a different day. Time repeats, but never quite the same. You nod, realizing this is the essence of Roman baking, a continuous, living clock, measured not by metal hands, but by the pulse of heat, the sigh of dough, and the whisper of crust. And as the last orange light slips away, the bakery hums softly, carrying the memory of the day forward, ready to mark the next in its own imperceptible, edible way. Night begins to settle over the city, brushing the rooftops with purple and gold. The market alleys grow quiet, leaving only the distant clip-clop of horses and the soft murmur of a few late wanderers. Inside the bakery, the heat has mellowed, but the oven continues its low, steady pulse. You realize this is the heartbeat of the day, now slowing, but never ceasing entirely. Gaius beckons you to follow him to the back of the bakery. The apprentices are already there, sweeping ashes from the coals, stacking peels, and cleaning the work surfaces. The motions are deliberate and unhurried, like the closing notes of a symphony. Even at night, Gaius says, we respect the fire. It has carried us through hours you've yet to understand. He stops beside a small alcove where another smaller oven rests, its interior blackened from years of use. This, he says, is our night oven, fires that work quietly while the big one rests. Not every bakery has one, but it's essential for training apprentices and keeping a flame alive for early morning. You kneel beside it, noting how tiny but perfect it seems. Gaius feeds a small bundle of kindling into the chamber. The sparks curl upward, illuminating the soot-streaked walls with tiny flickers of light. This oven teaches patience, he says softly. You can't rush it, or it will remind you in ways you won't like. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. In Rome, some bakeries maintained secondary ovens, precisely for training and experimentation. These smaller chambers allowed apprentices to learn the subtle nuances of heat and timing without risking the day's main production. You notice how this small oven feels almost alive, a miniature version of the furnace you first encountered, breathing quietly in the dark. Watch the flame, Gaius instructs. Notice how it dances at the edges. That's the lesson for the night. See? It moves differently than daytime fire. The air is cooler. The embers behave slower. You have to be sensitive. Let the oven speak. You lean in, eyes wide, and realize you can almost sense its rhythm, the subtle expansion of air, The gentle flicker of heat across the stone, the tiny whispers of moisture leaving behind patterns in the soot. It's hypnotic, and you understand for the first time why bakers spend years training with just flame and dough. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. In some Roman communities, bakers would leave small offerings, crumbs, coins, or even water, to the night oven, believing that it housed a protective spirit that ensured proper fermentation and warned against overbaking. The superstition may seem quaint, but it underlines the deep connection between human observation and the rhythms of fire. Gaius smiles, noting your fascination. Some historians still argue whether these rituals were superstition or practical technique. I say they are both. If you respect the oven, you respect time itself. He hands you a small, flattened piece of dough. Now you try. Feel the rhythm. Shape it gently. Let it tell you the hour. Your fingers press into the soft mass, and for a moment, you feel the pulse of the day behind the oven, the echo of all batches before this one. Each movement you make corresponds to a subtle shift in texture, temperature, and resistance. You understand, briefly, that the bakery isn't just a place of work. It's a sanctuary of time, memory, and subtle precision. You see, Gaius says, placing his hand over yours, it's alive, not like people alive, but alive in its own way. Every loaf, every crack, every sigh of heat tells a story. If you listen closely, it whispers the hours back to you. You take a deep breath, tasting the air thick with warmth and yeast, and realize you've begun to internalize that rhythm. It's not measured by shadows, not by water clocks, not by human chatter. It's measured by life itself, the expansion and collapse of dough, the crackle of crust, the sigh of embers. Even the small night seems to breathe with, as if the bakery itself is aware of your presence. You watch the flames curl gently, casting shadows across the walls. The apprentices move silently, every motion a soft punctuation to the stillness. Gaius kneels to adjust a tiny ember. Tomorrow, you'll see the first crack of day in this small oven. The lesson begins again. Time repeats, but each moment carries a different flavor. You nod, the weight of his words settling softly in your mind. The bakery, you now understand, is a place where hours are tangible, where night teaches patience, and where every act, feeding the fire, kneading the dough, listening to the crackling crust, is part of an unending conversation with time itself. Outside, the last light of day slips behind the rooftops, but inside, the ovens whisper and breathe. You sit quietly, feeling the pulse of Rome as recorded in flour, fire, and crust. Night deepens, and the bakery takes on a different character. The heat has softened, the fire hums low, and shadows stretch long across flour-dusted walls. The city outside is nearly silent, the echoes of carts and chatter replaced by the occasional call of a night watchman. Inside, you feel cocooned in warmth, as if the bakery itself is a womb preserving the day's memory. Gaius gestures toward the remaining loaves. Now comes the final observation, he says. We study the resting crusts. The oven has spoken. The dough has grown. We see what the day has taught us. You kneel beside the cooling racks. The loaves are lined like soldiers, each with a distinct texture and pattern. Some edges are dark and crisp, others golden and tender. The subtle variations record every second of the baking process, every flare of flame, every adjustment of the coals. You run your hand lightly over one crust, feeling the raised ridges, the faint cracks. Time, you realize, is etched in every surface. Gaius smiles at your concentration. Most people think clocks are about numbers. We know better. Look, feel, taste, Those are the measures that matter here. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Roman bakers often used visual and tactile cues to assess bread readiness. They developed an intuitive understanding of heat transfer, moisture content, and fermentation timing. Unlike modern bakers, who rely on thermometers, these artisans trusted their senses to gauge hours and quality simultaneously. You glance at a particularly dark loaf. Gaius picks it up, turning it slowly in his hands. This one, he murmurs, was challenging. The fifth-hour flame dipped unexpectedly. We corrected it, but you can see how it responded. The crust tells the tale. You notice the lines and fissures across its surface. The bread seems alive, like a fossilized heartbeat. It's strange and beautiful to think that something so ordinary could encode so much information. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some Roman bakers believed that if a loaf cracked too perfectly, it was a sign of favor from the gods. Crust imperfections, conversely, warned of misfortune or poor judgment. Superstition or subtle sensory awareness? Perhaps both. Historians still argue whether these beliefs influenced baking techniques or merely reflected them. You mutter, realizing you've been speaking aloud. Gaius chuckles softly. The past is full of arguments. Here, we pay attention. That's enough. You look around and see the apprentices quietly inspecting the loaves, tapping lightly, inhaling aromas, noting color shifts. Their movements are synchronized, almost meditative. Each action marks the passing of an hour, the completion of a batch, the preparation for the next cycle. He picks up a small piece of crust, crumbling it gently. Taste this, he instructs. You bite into it, and the flavor is profound. Hints of smoke, caramelized grain, subtle saltiness, all speaking of the fire's temperament, the day's humidity, and the precise moment of removal from the oven. You blink. Time, you realize, is not abstract here. It is sensory. It is edible. It lives in flavor, texture, and warmth. You chew slowly, feeling the hours unfold across your palate. Gaius nods. Tomorrow's batch will be different. The fire will speak different. The dough will respond different. But the cycle remains. Learning to hear it, truly listen, is the baker's art. You notice the small night oven at the back glowing faintly, like a contained heartbeat. Its warmth is soft but persistent, a reminder that even when human activity ceases, the cycle continues. The apprentices have left it tended, feeding it enough to maintain the embers. You feel a strange serenity as you watch. Here, time is not a rush of minutes and seconds. It is the slow unfolding of flavor, the gentle crackle of crust, the whispered language of heat and moisture. Outside, the city sleeps. Inside, the bakery holds the record of the day. Every loaf, every ember, every shadowed mark on the flour-dusted floor is a testament to the passage of hours, held in tangible, edible form. Gaius leans back against a counter, eyes closed, listening to the soft hiss of cooling bread. Tomorrow, he says softly, we read the clock again, and it will have new secrets to tell. You close your eyes briefly, letting the warmth and rhythm sink in, and feel the strange satisfaction of having witnessed a city's hours written in crust, dough, and flame. The bakery has grown almost eerily still. The only sound, the low, steady hum of the ovens, and the faint sighing of cooling loaves. You sit on a flour-dusted stool, tracing idle patterns with your finger on the worn wooden counter. For a moment, the day's chaos, the heat, the cracking crusts, the bustling market feels suspended, like you've stepped into a space outside of ordinary time. Gaius approaches, carrying a tray of small buns. Before we rest completely, we do one last check, he says. Night tasting. You raise an eyebrow. Isn't that excessive? Excessive, he replies, is relative. We're not just baking bread, we're reading the day. He offers you a bun, and you take it tentatively. The texture is soft, yielding under your teeth. The flavor subtle, but intricate. Warm grains, a whisper of honey, a touch of salt. He bites into his own simultaneously, nodding in quiet satisfaction. "See," he says, "even at night, the dough remembers. It recalls the heat, the hour, the air's weight." A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Romans often baked multiple small loaves or buns alongside larger batches to monitor the oven's temperature and the dough's reaction. These were essentially test pieces, helping bakers make adjustments for the main loaves, a practical method that doubled as a quality control measure. You chew slowly, noticing the bun's texture change slightly as it warms to your body temperature. "So these little ones are like temporal probes?" Gaius grins. "Exactly. They're small, but they tell you everything the larger loaves might conceal. Listen, taste, watch. The oven whispers secrets if you're patient." You glance at the oven, glowing faintly in the dim light. It does seem almost sentient, as if aware of the attention it's receiving. The thought makes you smile. You never imagined time could feel so tactile, so alive. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Roman bakers believed the last buns of the day absorbed the character of the oven, almost like the personality of the fire itself. They were often saved for apprentices or young children, both as a teaching tool and a means of passing on the oven's knowledge. You chuckle at the idea, imagining future bakers tasting the fire's mood through a tiny bun. Gaius notices your amusement. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or careful observation, he says. But either way, it works. The buns are honest. You look over the cooling racks. Each loaf, each bun, each crumb is a record of the day. The crusts vary in shade and pattern, documenting the oven's temperament, the air's humidity, even subtle shifts in the firewood's composition. It's almost like a diary, written in edible ink. Gaius leans against a counter, arms crossed. "Tomorrow," he says, "the city will wake, carts will clatter, voices will rise, and we'll be here again, translating time into bread. Every crack, every aroma, every color, another page in the day's story." You nod, realizing that what seems like routine is in fact a delicate choreography, a continuous dialogue with time itself. You've watched hours pass not on a sundial or in numbers, but through sensory memory, the heat of the oven, the feel of dough, the aroma of crust. He taps a loaf gently. "Remember," he says, "even when you leave this place, you'll start noticing the hours differently. A crust will speak to you. A bubble in dough will whisper when the sun has shifted. The city has its own pulse, and the bread is how we follow it." You look around at the apprentices, the ovens, the racks of loaves, and the quiet, glowing remnants of fire. The bakery is both sanctuary and clock tower, keeper of daily time and witness to its subtle variations. And as you lean back, tasting faint warmth of bun still on your tongue, you realize the truth of his words. Here, time is tangible, edible, and alive. You have learned to read it, not with eyes or numbers, but with every sense you possess. You wake early the next morning, even before the first sun slices through the narrow alley. The city is still quiet, holding its breath, and you realize that the bakery itself has begun its day long before human steps echo in the streets. Gaius is already at the main oven, feeding it a few fresh logs. The flames leap up in greeting, licking the stone interior and sending a soft warmth across the room. "You're up early," you murmur, rubbing your eyes. Gaius glances at you with a playful grin. "Time starts when the dough calls, not when your legs drag." You follow him toward the workbench, noting that everything is arranged as it was yesterday. The bowls, the floured surfaces, the cooling racks. but somehow the air feels different. Morning has a scent all its own, a subtle sweetness carried by the slight chill, mixed with smoke, flour, and the faint tang of overnight yeast. He hands you a small portion of dough. First need of the day. Pay attention. Feel it. Listen. You press your fingers into the pliant mass. It resists, then yields, stretching with a soft, almost sentient quality. You can almost feel the previous day's hours lingering within it. Memory folded into gluten and water. It's strange, uncanny even. A mainstream historical fact floats to your awareness. Roman bakers often relied on the feel of dough to judge readiness. Temperature, hydration, and elasticity told them more than any sundial could. Some of the most skilled bakers became so attuned to these subtleties that they could predict the exact minute a loaf would finish baking. You knead slowly, mindful of the rhythm, and notice how Gaius watches you with quiet approval. Each fold, each stretch, marks time, he says. The dough remembers the day's previous hours and responds accordingly. Ignore it, and it will correct you. A quirky tidbit emerges from the recesses of memory. Some ancient bakers believed that touching dough at specific times, before sunrise, during the third hour, or at the first crackle of oven fire, could influence both the rise and flavor of bread. The belief may seem mystical, but practical outcomes often followed. Historians still argue whether this was ritual or effective tech, you murmur, echoing Gaius's earlier line. He chuckles softly. Technique, ritual, both feed the bread. The day unfolds slowly. Each loaf is shaped, stamped, and placed in the oven with deliberate. You notice the subtle changes in the dough from batch to batch. One rises faster, one slower. The crusts crack different under the heat. Each variance is a note, the ongoing symphony of the day. You pause to watch the apprentices, all moving in fluid motion, passing loaves, feeding coals, dusting surfaces. There's a quiet reverence in their gestures, a learned awareness that every action affects the bread, and by extension, the hour. The market outside begins to stir. The soft clip of hooves and the distant call of merchants punctuate the rhythm inside the bakery. Yet the pace within remains measured, dictated not by external chaos, but by the silent language of dough, crust, and flame. You slice open a loaf from the second batch. Steam curls upward, carrying an aroma that is nearly intoxicating. The crumb is perfect, honeycomb, resilient. It is a record of every touch, every turn of the oven, every nuance of morning light filtering in. Gaius leans against a counter, watching you. The city runs on bread, he says softly, but the baker doesn't chase it. We listen. Every day, the oven, the dough, the crust, they tell us the hours, the rhythm. And when you can read them, you've learned to live in time itself. You nod, understanding the depth of his words. Time here is no longer abstract. It is layered, tangible, and alive. You've seen it in the crusts, felt it in the dough, heard it in the oven. And as the morning unfolds, you feel as though the city itself is a clock, with the bakery as its beating heart. The fire crackles gently, a lullaby of warmth. The dough expands, the crusts harden, and the city wakes beyond the walls, unaware that its hours are being measured in taste, texture, and the patient language of bread. By midday, the bakery is alive in a rhythm that you no longer need to follow consciously. You can sense it as naturally as breathing. The earlier batches are cooling, filling the room with their sweet, nutty aroma, while the ovens are refueled and ready for the next stage. Gaius moves among the apprentices with fluid, almost imperceptible gestures, adjusting heat here, guiding hands there. You notice that every motion, however small, carries meaning. It marks the passage of hours as clearly as the crack of crust or the sigh of rising dough. You slide your hands over a warm loaf, feeling the tension beneath the surface. So each loaf Tells time? You murmur, almost to yourself. Exactly, Gaius replies softly. The crust marks the past. The dough predicts the future, and we live in the moments in between, aware and attentive. A mainstream historical fact enters your thoughts. In the Roman world, bakers were indispensable to civic life. They not only provided sustenance, but also maintained schedules for markets, festivals, and the military. Some historians suggest that in cities like Rome, bakers function as unofficial timekeepers, coordinating daily life through their understanding of dough, heat, and fermentation. You look at the apprentices, each absorbed in the tasks of the day, scoring loaves, kneading fresh batches, inspecting crusts. There's a sense of solemnity, almost ritualistic. Even in the smallest actions, time is recorded. The angle of a slash on the crust, the faint sheen of oil brushed over a bun, the slow rise of dough in a warm corner. A quirky tidbit bubbles up. Some bakers believed that whispering small blessings to the dough could influence its rise and flavor. Whether superstition or subtle encouragement, it underscores the intimate relationship between humans and the bread that defines their hours. You catch Gaius murmuring under his breath as he kneads, a soft, rhythmic cadence that seems to guide the yeast itself. Historians still argue whether such practices affected outcomes or were merely comforting routines. You note aloud, half to the room and half to yourself. Gaius chuckles. Either way, it works. The bread doesn't lie, and if you listen closely, neither does time. The market outside grows louder. Cartwheels clatter, merchants shout, and the scent of fresh produce mingles with that of the bakery. Yet inside, the day flows steadily. The fire hums, the ovens breathe, and every loaf, cooling or baking, is a silent chronicle. You realize that by observing, tasting, and touching, you've been reading this clock for hours, even without noticing. You lift a piece of crust to your mouth. It snaps crisply, releasing a symphony of flavor that seems to hold sunlight, smoke, and patience all at once. You chew slowly, savoring each note, feeling a strange sense of unity with the hours themselves. The rhythm of the bakery, the pulse of the city, and your own heartbeat converge into a quiet awareness. Time is tangible, edible, and alive. Gaius moves to a cooling rack and taps a loaf lightly. Tomorrow will be another story, he says soft. Another set of hours to measure, listen to, and taste. But for now, we rest. The ovens have spoken, the dough has taught, and we've learned how to listen. You close your eyes briefly, breathing in the aroma of flour, smoke, and honeyed crust. The city outside continues unaware, but here, inside these walls, the day has been recorded, marked, and celebrated. Every crackle, every sigh, every touch is a testament to the passage of hours. Hours measured not by numbers, but by the living, breathing language of bread. And in that quiet, warm space, you finally understand. Time can be felt, savored, and even eaten, one crust at a time. Now the bakery grows still, the fire reduced to gentle embers, and the day's rhythm begins to fade into soft memory. You sit quietly, letting your body sink into the warmth that lingers like a faint heartbeat beneath the stones. Each loaf, each crust, each subtle crackle has left an imprint, not only on the bakery, but on you. You feel time stretching and soften, no longer a sequence of numbers or demands, but a living, breathing flow you can touch and taste. Outside, the city moves on, unaware of the silent symphony that marks every passing hour inside these walls. Yet in this quiet corner, everything slows. The hum of the ovens, the gentle scent of flour, the residual warmth of bread cooling, all merge into a comforting lullaby. You notice the faint whispers of the day still etched in the crusts, The subtle differences between batches, the delicate trails of steam, the lingering aroma of honey and smoke, and each one becomes a marker of a day fully lived and observed. Your eyes grow heavy. The lessons of the bakery settle softly into your mind. To notice, to listen, to feel the pulse of time in small, often overlooked places. Even after the ovens are emptied and the city moves on, the echoes remain in your memory. As tangible as any clock, the bakery has taught you patience, attention, and the quiet beauty of measured rhythm. Let your breathing follow the lingering warmth, slow and even, and imagine the faint sigh of a cooling loaf carrying you gently into rest. In this space, every second is precious. Every crack in a crust is a story, and every taste is a moment preserved. Now dim the lights, feel the soft pull of calm, and let the subtle, edible clock of this Roman baker fade slowly as you drift into sleep, carrying the warmth, the rhythm, and the quiet magic of time held in bread.